Welcome to the Culture Lab. I'm your host, Aga Bayer. This podcast helps you turn your company culture into rocket fuel for meaningful growth. It explores how we can make the word work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. It looks at how we can build remarkable cultures that scale as our businesses grow and the world keeps on changing.
What he said was, I realized that my paradigm of leadership wasn't fitting to the environment anymore, which was kind of like where I was when I was in the video games industry. I didn't know anything. My HR department wasn't fit for the environment. So I had to change my paradigm. So what David said was, I will give no more orders. I will shut up. What I will tell you is what the mission is. I'll give you intent. I intend to get the ship safely out of the harbor. Now you all do what you need to do to execute on that order. Do it directly. You don't need to ask for my approval. What I want you to do is just to work out loud and say, I intend to put in first gear. I intend to lower the periscope. I intend to divorce from shore power, whatever. And if nobody vetoes it, you go ahead and you do it, but you don't need approval.
Hello, and welcome to episode 91 of the Culture Lab podcast. This episode is brought to you by CultureBrained, a one-of-a-kind global community for leaders and culture champions who want to learn new ways of cultivating remarkable cultures at scale in this brave new world of remote and hybrid work. The CultureBrained community is where we come together to answer some pretty darn hard, ungoogleable questions about culture. And our members get to participate in things like weekly huddles, masterclasses, flash mastermind groups, and talks from world-class experts on culture. And you know many of these experts from this podcast. But most importantly, we facilitate deep peer-to-peer connections. Because making work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging, it's definitely not a task for a single person. It requires tapping into the collective wisdom of bold, kind, and curious culture leaders who are on a mission to redefine and, frankly, decrapify work. So, if this sounds like something you'd like to be a part of, check it out at tiny.one/CultureBrained. And don't worry, you don't have to write it down. There is a link in the show notes. Today, my guest is Heiko Fischer, the co-founder and CEO of Resourceful Humans. It's a company that helps organizations achieve what he calls 100% entrepreneurship and 0% bureaucracy. In this episode, Heiko will share and elaborate on a deceivingly simple yet really powerful reframe that basically changed the way he viewed HR and its role. So here's a reframe. Instead of viewing people at work as human resources, how about we view them for what they truly are? Resourceful humans. In a moment, you'll hear us talk about how this philosophy shaped the company culture at Crytek, one of the biggest European video gaming companies, and how Crytek managed to get rid of traditional HR entirely and turn its company culture into its most powerful competitive advantage. Heiko will riff on the power of eliminating artificial hierarchies, antiquated operating models, and unleashing leadership in teams that run our companies. Now, there might be some crickets making a guest appearance on the show today. It's because I'm recording this from a beautiful seaside village in Peloponnese in Greece. So if you can hear them, enjoy this special summer edition of the Culture Lab podcast.
I'm the chief troublemaker here at Resourceful Humans, as my colleagues call me. We founded RH 12 years ago with the mission to, it's a very lofty term, evolve the human condition through work technology. But we really believe in what we're doing. So we do peer-to-peer collaboration software and virtual reality leadership games to help people shift from hierarchies to network enterprises.
That sounds so fascinating, and I really can't wait to dive deeper into it. But before we go there, let's rewind a little bit. I'll ask you a question that I ask all our listeners at the beginning of the interview, which is, what were the early cultural influences that shaped you as a human being and as a person? How did you grow up?
Like any son, I have daddy issues. So
Tell me about yours.
for me, the daddy issues were fantastic. I just had to figure them out. So it took me like 40 years to figure out what sort of a backpack my father packed for me that I had to untangle. My dad worked for Hewlett Packard for 35 years, and my dad absolutely loved his life and his job. So the experience I had as a kid was the company had such a strong influence on our family. Like we were expatriated to Geneva, the company literally moved our family. And then I had this experience of going from an all German school with a narrow minded perspective to an international school in Geneva, which is probably the most cosmopolitan experience you can have on earth. So through a company, my horizons were broadened, not only for me, but also in the sense of how my dad came home from work. So when I compared notes with my peers at school, they'd say, today my dad or my mom came home and as usual, she was tired and she had to say, leave me alone for an hour. I need to come down. Such a horrible day, stupid bosses, ridiculous things they made me do and jump through hoops. And my dad came home and it was sort of like this Walt Disney thing, like, hi ho, it's from work. And he was energized. He came home energized.
Wow.
Like he brought home posters. I have one in the office with me right now, for example, of the space shuttle landing. So that there's this huge poster of the Columbia landing. And for the longest time, I thought my dad worked for NASA or something. It was a real downer when I heard that he worked in HR at HP, but
Did you even know back then what HR
I had no
was?
idea. I
Yeah.
had no idea.
But it doesn't sound very exciting. I agree.
But NASA and astronaut, that I could deal with. I'm like, wow, my dad's like, for me, my dad was Elon Musk, basically. Like the good Elon Musk, pre Twitter Elon Musk.
It's a big conversation, Elon Musk. Maybe we'll get
Yeah,
there,
let's
but
not
yeah,
go.
let's put a
That's a
pin in.
slippery slope. No, but so the thing for me was that there was an energy that work infused in my dad. And when we talked about like this poster, for example, I asked him and I said, Dad, why are you bringing home a poster of Columbia? And he said, well, our company that I work for, we make calculators that the astronauts use to calculate the re-entry vector so they get back to Earth safely. But for me, it was so mind-opening that the company would make an advertisement in which their product wasn't even shown. It was about what contribution the product has on the world around it, right? And HP had this fantastic management philosophy called the HP way that was set by the founders, Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard. And there's this video that the employees made after the death of the two founders. And one of the guys sits down and he said, look, the thing about HP was that they understood that the purpose of a company is not to make money. The purpose of a company is to make a contribution. And for that, it needs to generate value, right? It was a very different mindset that these people went to work with, which was creating meaningful contributions. And back then, I mean, you have to imagine that was like 1948, 1950. They came out with a philosophy that said decisions should be made at the lowest possible level. They were already anticipating a future that still companies struggle with today, right? And my dad was like fully immersed in this. He started there when he was 18 and he grew up with this. And so I grew up with that. That was my upbringing was HP. So in longer conversations, when people ask me, where are you from? I always have the like ABC choice. I say either like I'm from Frankfurt or I'm German, or if I really want to have a conversation, I say I'm from HP. Like people
Yeah,
there,
totally. I get
they
that.
would literally say, if you talk to them and they would say, cut me open and I bleed HP blue. Like it was that strong a culture.
Wow.
And that was my upbringing. Yeah.
That's an incredible story. And HP really had been such a progressive company back then and still is to a great extent. So, you have this experience as a kid. And by the way, I can totally relate to it because my dad was a basketball coach. And so my experience with someone who works was exactly the same as yours because obviously he was so incredibly passionate about what he was doing at work. And the experiences of my friends and their parents really didn't track with mine. So I totally get that. But I did have my mom who worked as a school teacher and she had a completely different experience at work. So she would come back home and she would be like, ugh, was horrible and I hate going there.
Because of students like me.
Well, could be. I don't know. But I no, but seriously, I know actually what the reason was. And the funny thing is, it wasn't the students. She actually loved the students, but it was the whole system and the colleagues and the things that were just this daily grind that she didn't enjoy. So you have this experience. You grow up in a way that basically the message is work can be fun. Then you grow up.
I would say one thing. I often have this discussion. Fun is a secondary effect. The work was meaningful. HP wasn't always fun. It was sometimes very hard, very tedious. They had the same struggles that any other company had, but they felt it was worth it. It was meaningful, right? So fun right now in this new work movement, a lot of companies are trying to strive towards fun work environments, fun experience. I totally don't buy into that. I think meaning is the important part.
Yeah. So we are actually talking a lot about fun and trying to educate people around what fun really is at work. We do use this word and it's triggering for a lot of people. And one of the reasons is exactly this movement that you talk about that basically presents fun at work as ping pong tables and Friday
Yeah.
pizza parties and all that stuff. And we say, no, actually, there's plenty of research that fun at work is simply enjoying the work itself. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be easy. It doesn't have to go with a beer or a ping pong table.
In that sense, I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we're fully aligned around that. I think what's interesting is that you see a person who is getting a lot of meaning, as you say, and a lot of satisfaction out of your work. And then you grow up and you start your own professional career. I know that you worked for HP yourself, but then you moved on to two giants. Bayer, I think, was one of them, right? A German company.
Mm-hmm.
And the other large company that you worked for in your career was?
There were a couple. The most influential for me was my last station in the video games industry. But maybe one note on HP is it's a terrible idea to start working in a company where your dad was a big shot. Don't ever do that. It's like, the amount of times people came up to me and was like, oh, you're just like your dad. Blah, blah, blah. You don't want to do that. Like, you should go as far away as possible, make your own path. For me, it was sort of a love affair with the company, but then I quickly figured out I need to find my own niche. Even this was his story, I needed to write my own story. And I think over a longer trajectory, I got so disenfranchised at some point with HR, especially at companies like Bayer, the super corporate environments where they kind of told me that HP is a fluke, that's an outlier,
Right.
that's not normal. What you encounter here is normal. So now get with the normal, right? And I've always felt like that's wrong. It feels wrong. Like they were right and this is wrong. And it was almost like they were trying to brainwash me back into something. And I always resisted and I had a miserable time. And
But that would be my question. How did your experience at Bayer, that is a pharmaceutical company and a very traditional one, how did it track with your experience in HP and the experience that your dad had? Because I imagine that these must have been really totally different experiences.
you can't upend somebody more culturally than what I expect. So I started working at HP in Barcelona. So one of the most beautiful cities in the world and one of the most amazing companies in the world. And then I transferred to Bayer in Leverkusen, which is like the armpit of Germany,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a
Mm-hmm.
chemical plant. It's ugly in a
Oh,
very, very traditional German company. And I was just like, what did I do? I mean, this was my choice. It was my own idiocy. So it was very educational in a sense for me that I knew exactly what I was moving away from and what I had to deal with. But after that experience, I was so done, not only with that kind of company, but also with HR that I went to eBay and I went into customer service. I want to go into leadership. I want to have a team. I want to try out all these things that I've seen at HP. I don't need to be in HR for that. I didn't have the influence anyway to make systemic change yet. As you said with your mom, this is to influence the system. You really need to be in the C-level somewhere, a higher echelon, right? I wasn't at that point in my career. So I said, I need a sphere of influence. I need a couple of people around me where I can do my thing and show that it provides results. So eBay gave me that playing field. It was a fascinating company at the time, very interactive with its community, and really very, very educational experience for me, great leaders around me, young leaders that I could learn from. And then I sort of recharged my batteries and said, all right, now it's time for the boss battle, back into HR. And now I want to do this on a level where I can really try and do this on a larger scale. And that's when I got the opportunity to go to, yeah, at the time, largest video game company, Crytek, crazy company. Three young brothers who had founded the company. It was growing through the roof. Back then, video games still very niche. I think now it's kind of arriving in the mainstream of society, but back then, I remember when I told my mom, like, I'm going into a video game company. She's like, "Oh no, we've done everything wrong. All the money for the education down the drain." It was kind of like, it felt like a failure to her. The kind of games they made was also, it wasn't something that anybody around me could relate to, sort of shooters. But it's a world on its own, right? It's really fascinating. Like my first day, I remember, to get a feel for the company, I would sit into the interviews and look at how people interacted with each other. And there were these two guys. I mean, you have to imagine this was predominantly male back then, and usually like really fit all the stereotypes. Like the people there were socialized in basement with pizza, and they're like complete nerd culture, right? In a very fantastically awesome way. So they sat in there and they interviewed a guy about aliens, because we're making a game about aliens. So they sat there with an extremely straight face, extremely serious. They were like, "So can you explain to us why your aliens are flying, and how a bipedal alien would have a harder time flying than a non-bipedal alien?" And I sat in there and I was grinning, but they were serious, and I had to control my face because I was like, "Holy crap, this is their business, like they're flying aliens is what we do here, this isn't a joke."
I just love it. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall in some of these interviews.
So this was absolutely tremendously game changing in the sense that it was a company at the size where you could go to a founder and say, "I have a crazy idea. Can we do it?" And the person would just say, "Go for it." Right. So there was no workers council. There was no go through this process. It was still very direct ways. It had this, we were right at the threshold of that size where you could still do crazy things. And you were in an industry where there were no norm. Like you have to imagine that gaming or software development at that point were kind of like, that's where the primordial soup was for everything that is now agile and all this kind of thing. But back then, it wasn't called agile. It was just called, how do we make a really kick-ass video game and make money with it, and not die along the way, right? Because the entire technological landscape around you shifted so quickly from PlayStation 1 to 2 to 3, and you were making a game trying to do the best you could to get it under the Christmas tree by the end of the year. So we had to figure out different ways of managing the company. Plus, back then, already in that industry, the mobility of the people was incredible. Like you'd basically pick a city and say, "I want to work in Vancouver next year. What game is being made in Vancouver? Okay, I'll apply there. I'll be a level designer at Ubisoft Vancouver, and then I'll work on that game." Like you could pick, right? This is that, as an employer, you would really have to offer something incredible for people to stay. And most of the American studios were competing on salary and bonuses. And we couldn't do that because with the labor laws that we had in Europe, we couldn't just replicate the hire and fire. So, and we didn't want to. So we said, what we have to do is we have to create a culture where people say, we'd be stupid to leave. This is so awesome here.
So basically, your goal was to make your culture your competitive advantage.
Exactly. So at that point, I looked back and I said, I need to actually unpack what made HP tick. What was it that created that sensation of engagement and love and all these words that you usually don't associate with a company. They were beyond this Harvard Business Review analysis. They were deeper. And that led me down the rabbit hole to all these organizations that were really mavericks.
Mm.
Semco,
Morningstar,
yeah,
Semco, yeah.
Morningstar, Patagonia, that really went on another level of, let's change the basic mechanics of how companies are run. And so that's how we slowly migrated from a sort of, yeah, we have a hierarchy, which we always ignore, to let's acknowledge that a hierarchy doesn't work in this highly dynamic context that we're in. And let's make this a network. Let's create small game teams that are end-to-end responsibilities for their games, that they feel like owners of their own little studio inside this larger organization. Let's have them have skin in the game so they know that if we make a great game, we participate in the financial success of it bit by bit. We created ways to integrate the gaming concepts and the gaming technology into how we shape and transform the culture. And this was just, I can't say it any other word other than it was absolutely amazing to be part of that ride because none of what we'd done had been done before. Because video games had never been at that point where you had this kind of graphics, you had these kind of technological means to say, if we want to shift culture, why don't we use our own products, our games, to help our people transition from state A to state B? And suddenly you had them as collaborators. You're like, hey guys, we're trying to make a game that'll help us to get from here to there and shift the mindsets and level up people and their competencies. And they're like, that's awesome. How do we do that? And it became a game design process in itself.
That sounds amazing. That sounds absolutely amazing. I definitely want to unpack a few elements there. Also, something that you haven't mentioned, but I want to highlight is that as an HR director in Crytek, you basically also helped the company scale from 200 to 1,000 people through that a system of networks. And so I'm wondering, because a lot of our listeners are in growth stage companies and they are going through these growing pains. What were your key takeaways and learnings from that process of such a rapid growth while at the same time reinventing the way you worked?
It's really interesting I touched on that point because I've seen so many excuses from people who say that they can't do a cultural transformation. And usually the excuse I hear the most is now's not the right time. We're growing so fast. We have other problems, right? And my answer is always like, this is exactly when you need to do it. And this is not either or, but this is sort of a yes and. Total credit to my RH team back then and the managing directors and the founders who fully supported. The HR department is always completely dependent on the quality of the leadership around it. You can do nothing in isolation. And I said from the start that we need to make the way the goal. So if we want to change the culture, if we want to satisfy the growth and the basically cash in on the potential of the company, then we need to move away from the traditional ways of we work with these recruitment agencies and we're competing on all the same things with companies out there and this war for talent. We will sidestep all that. The goal from the start was a very concrete action item, which was referrals will become the way that we recruit. So if people who are connected in the industry in our company say, you'd be stupid not to join this company, come work with me here, we'll reward that. For that, we need to make people fully convinced that where they work is the best place to work, right? So we started very early on to do things like everything that we have post Corona now to say, we don't give a flying F where you work from, right? You can work from home, you can work from the beach, as long as you have stable Wi-Fi. If you log in your code on time, you have to keep your commitments. But where you do that, we don't care, right? If there's moments when the team agrees we have to meet and we have to see each other in person for creative exploration, then we need to do that too, right? But other than that, you're an adult, do it. You manage your life. Back then was unheard of, right? That a company says,
Totally unheard of. I mean, we're talking 10, 12 years ago.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, right? And the founders acknowledged it. They said, well, that's how we started. We started in a little shed somewhere in El Armpito in Germany, and we couldn't tell people to come because we didn't have enough space. So we relied on them to be responsible and do it from their work desk at home or something. That was the core of it, right? We said we have hyper growth, and in order to satisfy that growth, we'll make, as you said, the culture the competitive advantage. So let's move away from paying for talent to convincing them that they'd be stupid not to come to us. We also said that we can't pay above market. So we'll pay at market, even a little bit below it. But the bonus structure we created was very much tied to individual and collective effort. So it wasn't something abstract like company shares or something, but if you knew I'm in this game team A, and this game sells, I don't know, 3 million copies, then I know how much I'm going to get out of it. The way we did that was we created a bonus system where, again, you have to imagine this was 12 years ago, people would individually recognize each other with a virtual currency. And this was something that we designed with them. We called it stars. It was very simple system. Back then we said, everybody has 10 stars per week, and you have to reward positive contributions that you see around you. So if you see a level designer did something great, hey, Frank, super what you did there. Here's 3 stars for the amazing aliens that you made that can fly with 5 wings. Yeah. And they get that and they basically have it on their device and they say, oh, I was recognized for my great work. I have 5 stars in the bank. And you knew, okay, the projection for our profit margin is X. So 1 star is worth 35 euros. So now I have 5 times 35 euros. So people felt like they felt ownership of their game, they felt agency over their work, and they felt invested. They felt like entrepreneurs because suddenly there was something in it for them to make an even better game, to add even more value, right? And this became word of mouth in the industry, and suddenly people came to us voluntarily. We didn't have to go out, run after them, and lasso them and convince them. They came to us and said, "Do you have a spot for me?" But again, going back to your very first question, this is a discussion that you need to have with your leadership to say, we need to really invest in this and we have to change things to get out of the hamster wheel of recruiting.
Mm-hmm. Yes, totally. One of the questions, I think there are a few objections that people would throw at us when they listen to this. One is, okay, that's great and recommendations are great, but do you really get a diverse organization and diverse talent through that process? Because it seems to me that when you ask your employees to recommend their peers or, their friends, you will end up with a series of basically mini-me's. Everyone is the same. Everyone is a white male, and because they are the people that they spend time with. Can you speak to that a little bit?
The risk is absolutely there. I think that is the risk of referrals. I think the unique thing about video games was that the people are so passionate about the product because every creator of a video game is a consumer of a video game. So they're very unbiased in terms of who do you get into the company as long as they can make a very worthwhile contribution, right? But the risk is absolutely there. And at the time, you have to, again, remember there was hardly a woman around. There was hardly any diversity in terms of gender, at least. I think the internationality in games was always there. I mean, this company from the start was English because there was no local talent pool, so there were certain parts which were incredibly diverse and there were certain parts which were not diverse at all. I think if we had to do this again nowadays, same process, you'd have to do it differently. So absolutely right. The risk is there, but at the time it didn't present itself to us. There were 2 instances actually where I really got a bloody nose trying to do this. And I was perceived as HR. I mean, you have to remember, we did our own we gamified HR, that the way that the whole, later the name of Resourceful Humans of the company that we founded after Crytek came to be was that I said at the beginning, our end game, our boss battle for HR is if this company becomes a network of entrepreneurs, there is no need for a central HR department. Our end game is kill HR. And this was a crazy suicide mission for us, because we were like, what? Are you crazy? You're asking us to make ourselves obsolete and then we're unemployed? I'm like, yeah, but it's the best thing you can write on your CV to say, hey, I can help you create a company without overhead, without central HR, where everybody and the teams are owning the things that HR is usually doing directly in their business. Anyways, so that was the start of that process that we ourselves said we need to do this and we need to get HR off the map, that from human resources to resourceful humans. Now, and with regard to diversity, I was trying to be very un-HR, but there were 2 things that I did which kind of fell on my feet. Well, one fell on my foot, the other one was funny. The one was we tried to actively promote women at the workplace because they were so underrepresented in the video games industry. So we had a women's club that met, I think, once a month, and then they would discuss what can we do to get more women into the company. And it was led by one of the women in my HR team because obviously I had women in HR, but nobody had them in the business teams, in the game teams. And I remember that the lady, Elizabeth, she came back to me and she was super pissed, super angry. And she's like, this really backfired. And that all the ladies there, they said, what you're doing to us here, making us come to these monthly meetings, it's working against us. We are completely equal in the game team. We're completely on eye level, and now you're taking us out and you're making us something special. So we're getting off time while the others are still working. So you're discriminating sort of against us by trying to promote us. Just leave us alone.
This is such a typical thing, though, that will happen in organizations. I really love the fact that you are bringing it up because I was actually on one of these committees in PwC, which for those of the listeners who don't know it, PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of the big four, huge consultancy. And it felt ridiculous to be on the women's committee. So I had the same
Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
So they told us just leave us alone, right? So we're like, all right, well, if there's anything you need, please come to us, and we'll try to create a better context for you. Other than that, we'll be hands off, right? The other thing though was that we had to show them where their bias was. So we had the game teams recruited for themselves. We migrated the whole hiring, onboarding, everything was in the responsibility of the game teams. But again, you have to remember these are very young, very immature people. They were good gamers, good creators.
Exactly. And I think that would be one of the objections, again, that if I can kind of channel our listeners, I'm imagining that people are thinking, yeah, that's great. But, especially in the gaming industry, you will probably have a lot of really young people with no experience. So how do you make sure that the decisions they make and the way they behave is constructive and doesn't cause any major issues?
So what we had to do was we had to acknowledge the reality that all of us had to go through a valley of tears and learn this, right? So the important thing was that we had an alignment in the leadership. The teams will own this and they will make mistakes along the way, and we'll be there to coach them through it and to have measures, trainings, and all of that to make it as pain free as possible. Inevitably, it would happen. So we had this game team that had to recruit for a junior artist position. And out of the blue came the rarest of diamonds. A beautiful young woman was applying for this particular position, which was rarer than gold in the games industry, right? So there was 10 young men going into a meeting room with very little blood in their brains to interview this young girl. Came out 5 minutes later and says, she's everything we've ever hoped for. Give her a contract now. And that's it, right? And we're like, objection. We think she's actually maybe from the CV, we're not gamers, but maybe she's a bit too young. And what you need is maybe someone a bit more senior than this. Even they're like, you know nothing of games. Get out of our way, HR. You said kill HR. So now's your moment to die. Go away. And we're like, all right, okay. I mean, it's on you, right? So 3 months later, in comes the head of the game team into my office. And he's like, hey, Heiko, I just wanted to let you know that the young girl that we hired, she's not going to cut it. Can you talk to her that she has to pack her things and leave and start the recruitment process for somebody else?
Just clean up our mess, please, Heiko.
Exactly. And I was like, hey, no, 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 no. Come back in here. Hey, let's have a chat. Huh? This is not how this works. And this is exactly, I think, the moment when HR also needs to get out of that nanny position, right? Now don't become the scapegoat and the cleanup crew, right? So I said, no, guys, you've decided this. I've objected. You overruled me, and now you will own this. You will go back into a conversation with this young lady. You will tell her where she's failing because I don't know if you've given her that feedback, and then we'll take it from there. Okay. So this time they walk into that meeting room, 10 men with their heads hanging low. This time the blood definitely in their brain. And they came out 3 hours later. And the team lead came to me after and he said, okay, so we've given this young girl another chance. We've given her a mentor on the side. She'll be coached. And in case she really doesn't make it, then we'll find her a new job. And suddenly, boom, they owned it. They understood that their actions have consequences. I tell you, this game team, you could have brought anybody, Angelina Jolie, they would have grilled her. Like they learned that lesson, but you had to hold them accountable.
Yeah,
And I think
totally.
that's where a lot of people go down to their knees because, of course, this guy immediately ran to the founder of the company and he gave him I have to make a game. And the HR guy says he's not going to help me. But we had already aligned, right? And the guy said, no, 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 that's not exactly what happened, right? So if you want to bring HR into a different position, the leadership needs to stand side by side to level up the competencies in the teams because they will be kicking and screaming. And I think this is a very important point. The willingness of people to work in a more adult, freer, more invested way is there, but they have no idea what that means.
Yes, and people don't know what they don't know, right?
Exactly. And that's normal. But you have to hold them to the pain and you have to say, we agreed to do this. And right now you're in puberty and puberty is ugly and it hurts and you have doubts and you have pimples and we'll get through it. But this is the part where I think a lot of the companies tend to say, oh, let's just go back. Can you just do it? We have so much to do. Can you just do it? But then you're on a slippery slope back.
Totally, totally slippery slope. And I also think that it happens very often because of genuinely good intentions. I think, especially in HR, by natural selection, you have a lot of people who genuinely care and want to be helpful. And sometimes they just overdo it. And your story is such a great illustration of how actually the role of HR is to make others stronger so that they can be autonomous and, as you say, grow up and behave as adults at work rather than just being babysat by someone in the HR department when they come across the messy people issues that we all eventually come up across. So that's such a great story that illustrates that.
The important part was to change the rules for HR from the start to say success for us is not doing it well. It's enabling others to do it well or better than us even, like that was the hardest part. And I think this is where I got super lucky that the people in my team really embraced this. They stepped up to this. And the thing that validated me is that a lot of the people out of my team became HR leaders themselves and they've embraced this. And it was certainly something that we got ridiculed for at the time, like the traditional HR leaders, like, oh, that's the killer HR guy. He's completely nuts. It wouldn't have worked any other way in this company. Traditional HR did not work. Like if you try to do annual performance appraisal in a company that has 2 week sprint cycles, you're being ridiculed inside your company. So I'd rather be ridiculed outside of it. So
Yeah, totally, totally. I love that. I love the fact that you had that almost like big purpose statement. I often talk with people about how to create that so that you gain that clarity. And it's a really simple statement that says, we are here in order to dot, 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 so that dot, dot, dot. And I think that, as you say, you put that foundation in place and then it was way easier to make the right decisions when you are faced with a dilemma or a situation like this and stay the course, because there will be probably a lot of situations where you feel tempted to meddle, to step in, to do something different, as you say, to back off because things become difficult. Wonderful. So thanks for sharing it.
I think one thing that helped us at the time was a lot of the things that we could leverage from games that is now making, again, its way sort of into the mainstream is from multiplayer gaming and stuff. We had data. We could do organizational network analysis before that was a thing. So if somebody came to us and cried wolf, we could say, let's look at that data, let's visualize it, and let's see, is that really a thing or is it just one tiny speck? And if it was a tiny speck, we would just ignore it, but we could work very evidence-based because we could collect that data and look at it and make very strategic decisions about which direction do we want to move it. We had real-time data to say, are we moving that way? And that was in more than just performance management, but sort of we could visualize um, uh, the shadow organization that was underneath the, the structure that we've put, so we could see who are the people who really move things around here. I mean, one thing that gets thrown at me a lot is like, oh yeah, you had it easy because you didn't have a workers' council. And I said, yeah, I didn't have a workers' council, but you better believe there was a group of people who had all the influence in that company, which was sort of the eldest, the people of the first hour who had direct contact with the founders who were still friends. They had access, all this. So we said I had my own workers' council. They were holden to no rules. I needed to manage them, but I could see that group. I see where they were, and I actually we decided to treat them like in a positive way, like a workers' council. So if we did something radical, we went to them first and we said, hey, we want to soundboard with you. We're going to do some crazy shit here. If you did this, do you think that's wise? What do you think? How's it going to vibe with the culture? How people going to react? So we actually tried to do what I think the original intent of a workers' council is to say, is that in the interest of the people and move us forwards to safeguard their employability. And I think they understood that. And they rewarded that we came to them and that we really listened to them. And if they said it's shit, we didn't do it. So they really said it wasn't this political dance that is a workers' council relationship now. It was a very honest, open visor. We want to do a good thing. Is this a good thing? How would you adjust it? We will listen to you and we will adjust it kind of way, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's sometimes where a disconnect happens with workers' councils or unions or whatever is that the only question that is being asked is this in the workers' interest without thinking, is this in the interest of the organization and its customers? I can only imagine that in Crytek, that focus on customer was really good already, right? Because as you said, this company was basically run by gamers. Gamers love gaming. They're very passionate about the product and even more probably passionate about other gamers. So you didn't have that issue. But I wonder if you can speak to this challenge because sometimes, some of these people that you obviously need to get on board, they get fixated on what's the right thing to do for the workers and forget about what's the right thing for the organization that ultimately needs to serve a customer.
We had a super interesting discussion as we were redesigning the bonus system. At the very end, this STARS peer-to-peer system for feedback came out. We went around and we asked everybody, have you ever seen a good bonus system? Any of the companies that you were in? Is there anything that we can just, beg, steal, and borrow? Can we just clone something? We don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you say there was something great, we'll just do that. And then people came back and said, we did this, but it was kind of shit. And it all depended sort of on the quality of your manager. If your performance review was good or sound, and then from that would come a bonus that nobody felt that there was anything that really spoke to what they were doing. So we created this design process of how do we create a bonus system where everybody finds themselves reflected and their value contribution, right? This made them invested from the start. They became co-owners of the company, right? We had to breed entrepreneurship by making them the owners of the system that you work in. You mentioned this again. I want to go back to what you said about your mom. Like a bad system can beat a good person anytime.
Yeah, totally. And you know what we've also found through our research that this element of fun that we talked about at the beginning of our conversation, it's really tightly linked to our ability to improve the way we work and be a part of decisions that concern us. And I think this is exactly what you're talking about when you invite people to really figure things out so that they are a part of something that is ultimately going to impact their reality in a significant way. It immediately has a positive impact on the sense of ownership, the sense of engagement that you get from people. It's no magic, right? It's very straightforward. And yet, for some reason, many companies don't do that still in 2022.
We had to find very simple ways to relate to their world. So we said, look, an organization, you have a game to make. And in the game, you have a backlog of things that you have bugs to fix and you have features to create. And we'll do the same thing. The culture of the company is nothing else. So we have what we call the shit list. Those are things that you hate, that you want to get rid of. They're in your way of doing good work. And there are things that you need that you don't have right now that should be there so you could do even better work. This is in you. You own this. What we ask of you is that you create a company in which you can make the best possible uh, value contribution. The best way I heard this put was a fantastic guy who mentored me, Dan Walker, who was the CHRO at Apple under Steve Jobs. And he said, how easy do you make it for your teams to do amazing work?
Yeah, totally. That's a huge question.
And usually processes and bureaucracy, usually they hinder your teams to do great work, right? So we said, think of it as the game of work. In this game of work, what's in it for you? Employability. You want to level up your talents. You want to get something out of it. That might be the finances or the travel or whatever. And we want to get something out of it, which is the reputation of the company, the financial success of the company, the growth of the company. And we need to align those two as best as possible. And you are the company. So you should be in driver's seat of how this company operates, right? And it needs to balance both aspects. And they got this, right? And they understood this, that they handled it responsibly. And that was, I think, an extremely validating thing for us to see, going back to the example of HP. that people given responsibility more often than not will handle this very responsibly and surprise you positively.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet, and that would be my question just to wrap up this part of our conversation. We know this, and this knowledge has been available to us for decades. We know that people given responsibility will step up and usually really meet our or exceed our expectations. And yet, it seems like it's quite challenging for some organizations to disrupt the way they work and relinquish control. So, my question to you is, how do you bridge that gap? How do you take the leap? Because it seems that like many companies are still hesitating.
Books are written about this,
Yeah.
but that I think a lot of the things is, again, we were at a size and a nature of the company, we didn't really have middle management. The middle managers were also creators. There was very few people whose job was solely management. And I think the moment you start having a middle management, their entire purpose for existing is to do something, to manage something, to align something. In a way, they live off complexity and contradictions and complicatedness in the organization. That's their bread and butter, to deal with that. Right now, if you say, oh, here, we're going to go for broke, we're going to go for an uncomplicated organization that is a network without intermediaries where people connect one to one. They don't have to go through an approval chain. They don't have to go through a manager to get stuff done. They go to each other directly. And your job now is to enable that. They'll go, well, then what happens to me? Well, you'll be out of a job. Your success is you'll be out of a job. And they go, yeah, awesome. No. Yeah. I mean, this is at large companies, I take T-Mobile or Accenture, you're not talking about 100 people, you're talking about 10,000, 100,000 people whose job is that. What do you offer them? What's in it for them? You need to acknowledge that you've created a system that has rewarded this kind of work for decades. And now, if you're changing the game, you can't just say, hey, we've seen the light and we found a new way to be more profitable, and now you all need to work left instead of right. You need to acknowledge that there was a system that has produced these kind of leaders, these kind of infrastructure. And to change it, you need to offer a path to get there. And if you don't have that, then people will resist, and they will resist openly, or they'll sabotage you under the radar. So it's not as easy as pulling out the latest best practice and say, now we're going to do it this way, right? And I think that's why it was super important for us to have people invested in the ultimate success of the company in a very tangible, visible way so that they could see, if I make this organization leaner and better and stronger, I participate in it. It's not an abstract thing for we can create more shareholder value or something like that, or you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. I have skin in the game.
There's something in it for me, right?
Yeah, totally. So today, let's fast forward a little bit. You are the co-founder and CEO of a company called Resourceful Humans. I love this name, by the way. So maybe let's stop here and let me ask, what does it mean to you to be a resourceful human at work?
I'm just sitting in my co-founder's office here at RH, and she has these wonderful cartoons from Gaping Voids on the wall. And this Tony Robbins quote where it says, nothing happens until you decide to burn your boats. When if you want to take the island, you have to burn your boats. And for me, resourceful humans is that. It's people always say, I could do this. I could do what you did at Crytek, but I need more resources. I need more this. I need more that. Or it's not the right time to burn those boats, right? And for me, resourcefulness is all about now's the right time. The question is, you have to find it in yourself. You will find ways or you will find excuses. And this sounds trite. It sounds like a Gary Vaynerchuk kind of, like motivational slogan, but it's true. Either you start doing something or you don't. And you will never have enough resources. You will never have everything lined up. The stars are never quite right. You have to do it, and you have to get your team and yourself invested in how do we do this best. And this for me is the difference between a resource and being resourceful. And I think this is going back to the very beginning of your question in the podcast. HP did not treat It's people like resources. You did not feel like employee 10,588-9. You felt like I'm Heinz Fischer and I matter. If I come to work, people realize that I'm here. If I don't come to work, people realize that I haven't been here. If I do a good job, it makes a difference to the customer. If I do a bad job, it makes a negative difference to the customer. So you felt that your resourcefulness was meaningful. It had impact. And I think this for me is, we have this whole discussion in HR about, oh, we should call the department something different. And now I think the latest trend is people in culture or something, or human capital is the worst one, I think. But for us, it wasn't, let's not rebrand the department. Let's redefine what we're here for and then find a term that signals that to the outside world.
Yes. But it starts with the worldview and the mindset that needs to change. As you say, it's not a rebranding exercise. And that's why I love this name, because it clearly indicates that there is a shift of mindset and really forcing us to think about humans who work in our organizations slightly differently.
I have to give a credit to our CEO back then, Shevat Yerli of Crytek, because we were sitting in a meeting and he actually said that. He's like, look, Heiko, if you're going forward with this, you have to understand that to make good games, we don't need human resources. I don't need your department. You're the least. What I need is that everybody in this department is awesome. We need resourceful humans, and that was really for us the kickoff. Like, all right, good, there's the name. You got it.
Awesome, awesome. So credit where credit is due.
The funny thing is, if you talk to Dave Ulrich or something, he says the same thing in just different ways. He says it's outside in. It's not inside out. Human resources is an inside out mindset, right? Resourceful humans is an outside in, create value for others around you.
Yeah. And I want to bridge us to, conversations that I hear happening around me all the time, which is I hear a lot of people, especially in large organizations, interestingly, who say, we want our people to be resourceful. We want them to have entrepreneurial mindset. We need to be game changers as a company, come up with breakthrough innovation, blah, 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 blah. And yet, of course, you look at these organizations and many of them are not doing those things. They're failing miserably. So I think that you definitely are the right person to ask this question, because of resourceful humans, the philosophy, and also because your company's motto is 100% entrepreneurship and 0% bureaucracy. So, in your experience, what are the key barriers to more innovation and entrepreneurship and resourcefulness in organizations? If you could name top three, what are they?
For me, they're all the same. It's behavior of the top leadership. As a given name from all three positions, behavior of top leadership, behavior of top leadership, behavior of top leadership. For me, it really comes down to, you just said it. If the leadership says, I demand or I want more, well, what are you doing? What are you investing in it to get it? What system are you creating? What infrastructure are you creating to do it? Like, look, we work with really great and big companies like Accenture, and they say exactly that. They say, we need more innovation. We need more risk taking. Then people come and they say, I want to take more risks. And they go, what? You want to take a risk for something that's 3 years in the making and it's making peanuts? Man, we're printing money right now and we have large accounts. Why would you invest in that? So they say they want it, but then they don't reward it. They don't promote it, right? So the actions don't match the rhetoric. We all talk about failure nights and fuck up nights, but it's not really rewarded in your performance review process that you fucked up a couple of times. This is, so you say it, you promote it, it's your propaganda, but does it really happen? And if you go back to HP, so the fantastic anecdote from their leaders is that one of the guys came up with an idea and he said, I want to build something, I forget what it was, like some sort of new screen device. Yeah. And the founders had this philosophy called management by walking around. So once a week, they would just aimlessly wander through the company, engage people in talk and talk to them about their lives and strategy and just as connect as ordinary human beings,
Seemingly aimlessly.
seemingly aimlessly.
Not really aimlessly, yeah.
And the guy, Dave Packard, he came upon this guy, Chuck House, who was building this new thing. And Dave Packard said that's shit. I don't believe in that. I don't want to see that in the lab anymore the next time come around. So super hierarchical, super command and control, completely un-HP, right? So Chuck sat down at his desk and he said, well, that's not kind of what we stand for. That's not what the HP way is. I believe in this, that this will make a contribution, right? So he just took it forward. And a couple of months later, Dave Packard comes through R&D again, and he sees that this thing is in production. And he gets furious and he said, I said to kill this thing. And Chuck said, Dave, I respectfully disagree. You said you don't want to see it in the labs. It's not, it's in production, right? So he got him on a loophole. And the thing was successful, right? And then the next company meeting, remember back then HP wasn't that big, so in Palo Alto they had a company meeting, and Dave Packard had created a certificate of defiance. And in front of everybody, he said, I humbly have to apologize to Chuck, not because he was successful with this device, but because he reminded me that I was wrong, that we've created in the beginning, in the garage, products that didn't make it, but we created them because we believed in them. Chuck took this forward and he defied his CEO. That is exactly what I expect of all of you if you believe in this product. So I'm rewarding it with a certificate. Remember, for me, this is matching the rhetoric with action. He was humble. He apologized. He said he was wrong. And he said it wasn't because he was successful, but because he did the right thing. And I think that creates the kind of stories and the environment where you feel I can fail. I can try different things. I can defy even the founder of this company, right? But then the best example, that like a product that we've created now here at RH, because we felt it was so impossible to get our software into companies. Like it's such a missionary sale to peer-to-peer performance management. It's for many companies, it's such an upset to the system that they say, we love the idea of it. It's not going to fly. Yeah. So we said, how do we get a foot in the door? How do we get leaders to understand that if they want all these things that they talk about, more innovation, more risk taking, more entrepreneurship, less bureaucracy, how do we get them to understand it? It starts with them, with their actions matching their rhetoric, like they walk the talk.
Yeah, it goes back to what you have mentioned earlier, that leaders are responsible for creating that environment where people can do their best work, right? And that systemic element is not something that people in the front lines can influence, unfortunately, in many cases, because it requires decisions at a high level.
And you remember the mantra from HP, decisions should be made at the lowest possible level. We've kind of changed this a little bit.
Some decisions, though, yeah.
Yeah, but because we say that this already implies a hierarchy, this already implies a pyramid, right? So for us, it's move authority to information, to the customer. And this comes from a submarine captain called David Marquet. And David did something uniquely different. What he did was on his submarine, he decided to not give any more orders.
It was Santa Fe, wasn't it?
It was the USS Santa Fe. It's a fantastic business book. I highly recommend you pick it up and read it. It's called Turn the Ship Around. And so David was faced with that impossible task of he got the worst submarine in the fleet, the Santa Fe, and he was tasked with doing the turnaround of this ship, right? But he was trained for a different submarine. He was trained for USS Olympia, and a Santa Fe was quite a different submarine. And he said you have to imagine that a captain of a submarine is kind of like a chief smartass. You know, he knows everything better than everybody else. So he's not a sort of a people leader. He's more sort of the overall god of the ship, right? But he didn't know the ship as well as the people who were on it. So the very first order he gave was a disaster. So he stood on the bridge and he said, preparation was kind of like, I watched Hunt for Red October one more time. I tried to sound like Sean Connery, and it was like, okay, put Santa Fe into second gear, 50 knots, take us out of the harbor. And then the officer next to him said, yes, aye, Captain, second gear, 50 knots. Helmsman, take us out of the harbor, second gear, 50 knots. Nothing happened. Deadly silent on the bridge. You could hear a pin drop. And David was thinking, that's not what's meant to happen. I gave an order. The ship should move, right? And he sort of looked at the helmsman who was sitting at the controls, and he said he could see the shoulders vibrating, and the guy was pale. And he's like, helmsman, are you okay? Everything fine? We're not moving. He's like, Captain, I'm so sorry to tell you, Santa Fe doesn't have a second gear, sir. So
Yeah.
David was like, oh my God. So he looked at his first officer next to him and he said, hey, first officer, did you know that Santa Fe didn't have a second gear? And he said, yes, sir, I knew that. He's like, why did you tell the helmsman to put in second gear if you knew that we don't have a second gear? And the guy said, Captain, my job is not to think, but to transfer your orders. So Dave's like, so if I give an order that'll blow this ship up, you'll transfer it. He's like, yes, Captain, that is my job. He's like, oh my God. Like I'm the biggest risk to world peace, right? So like this was under Obama. I think he said that later in the Trump years. He said he was the second biggest risk to world peace. What he said was, I realized that my paradigm of leadership wasn't fitting to the environment anymore, which was kind of like where I was when I was in the video games industry. I didn't know anything. My HR department wasn't fit for the environment. So I had to change my paradigm. So what David said was, I will give no more orders. I will shut up. What I will tell you is what the mission is. I'll give you intent. I intend to get the ship safely out of the harbor. Now you all do what you need to do to execute on that order. Do it directly. You don't need to ask for my approval. What I want you to do is just to work out loud and say, I intend to put in first gear. I intend to lower the periscope. I intend to divorce from shore power, whatever. And if nobody vetoes it, you go ahead and you do it, but you don't need approval.
Mm-hmm. I love that statement of intention. And, speaking of actionable insights, right? Because this is what our listeners are always looking for. This is a great one to be taking away from our conversation with you, Heiko, today. How can you create an environment where people can, you still have that safety net because people do make a statement of intent and others can veto if it's really risky and dangerous. But the expectation is that they will actually find a way to execute the vision or the intention or the direction or whatever it is in organizations. What a great story.
The thing is, I mean, this is kind of what we're telling them is that this network software that we're creating is doing nothing but scaling that intent on a larger level, right? In a wider realm. It still makes it discussable. You're not giving up control. You're going for a different kind of control. And by turning this into a virtual reality experience for the leaders, the game gives you an actual emotional journey of what that feels like to let go. What David had to experience on a submarine, those leaders experience in the virtual reality simulation. They come out and they go, oh my God, I felt completely scared, powerless, helpless, like, okay, let's deal with it. What do you need to feel safer about this? But the important thing is, just like with Dave Packard and Bill Hewlett, what David Marquet showed is it starts with action on the leadership. He gave up giving orders. He replaced it with a different, better system. And that made the difference in the environment. You can't expect the environment to immediately live up in that vacuum to your full expectation. There's still a job to be done as a leader, like we saw with the recruiting at Crytek, right? You still need to be there to enable the resourcefulness in the humans. And I mean, that's what we base our business on, right? To create software to help them level up, to create that organizational clarity, like, where do you want this ship to go? Where do you want us to go and why? What is the purpose of all of this? But it starts with the behavior of the leaders.
Yeah, I love that. And it's a wonderful point, I think, to shift gears and move to the rapid fire questions section of this show. And the idea is that I will be asking you 5 questions in rapid succession, and you have the challenge of answering all these questions in under 2 minutes. So shall we give it a go?
Can I say one thing to that?
Yeah.
One of the exercises that we do with CEOs that we have here, it relates back to the HP example, and we ask them, how clear is your organization on the priorities and the purpose of your company? And we make them listen to a clip, Dave Packard stating the priorities and the purpose of HP in 1950 versus Meg Whitman stating them in the 2000s. And Meg Whitman, it was on NPR radio, I think with Kai Risdau, and she took 6 minutes. And he said the same thing you said. It's like, can you do it in 5 words or less, or can you do it in 60 seconds? And she just keeps talking and talking. She's like, well, it's a complex company, but at the end of the day, it's not. You need to be able to give a very clear sense of the direction and the priorities. So love that rapid fire section.
It's one of the parts of the job, right? To really simplify and create clarity. I like saying clarity is kindness, because When people don't have clarity, it's so hard to achieve anything meaningful. Okay, so let's go for our 5 questions. At CultureBrained, as I've mentioned, we are on a mission to make work synonymous with fun, the right kind of fun, meaning and belonging. So what is your number one tip to strengthen one or all 3 of these foundations of a healthy culture?
I have to be completely selfish here. I really believe that this virtual reality simulation that we've created to give people a sense of, if you're not there, put yourself in an emotional state where you can experience what that feels like to be there. It's like a projection into the future, like a shadow of the future. Play it. Playing is believing, right? And if you really put yourself in the shoes of, as if it were already there, simulate it. Don't talk about it. Try it out on your level. Don't delegate it to a department or something. Say, I take one specific thing this week. I'm not going to give any more orders, or I'm going to go to RH and I'm going to try that VR dive virtual leadership simulation that he did with David Marquet. But do something.
Mm-hmm.
Don't talk about it. Action.
And have an experience. I love it. What is the sign, or perhaps signs in plural, that a company culture needs some work, or perhaps even a major overhaul?
Silence. When people complain, that's good. You have something to work with. If they're silent, it's death. That is the ultimate. They've given up. It's submission, you know?
What company do you admire for their culture and why?
The HP I grew up with. It was the way I think business ought to be. If aliens were to come by, look at planet Earth and check, should we run anything on our planet the way they're running it? They looked at HP and they said, look at the people there. Look what they're churning out. That is fantastic. We should copy that and take it to our planet.
What books on culture or leadership would you recommend? I guess aside of Turn the Ship Around.
Yes. And Language is Leadership, the follow-up book to that. Fantastic books. The other one I can recommend is The HP Way, how Bill and Dave created HP. Seems like time out of time. And again, some of those things in there, they sound so simple. But as you said, there's an elegance in the simplicity when they say, can you agree on the board level that the purpose of your company is not to make money? Imagine that bold statement to come out to your employees and say, we're not about making money. We're about creating value. And that is such a different term.
What is one thing that our listeners can do tomorrow to build their own culture lab and start cultivating the sort of culture that will help them and their teams to truly bring that purpose to life, the one that you have just mentioned, something that makes their existence worthwhile as an organization?
Give them enough money for a great dinner. One of the very simplest things that we did at Crytek is we gave every team enough money to once a month go away and have a great lunch together. So we called it development by sushi, right? It was create a forum where these people connect outside the office, have a beer, have a laugh, have eat together or cook together or something, but not a team building exercise, not that, not that's not it. Just give them some money to go away and share food. Sounds super trivial, right? But if it's implemented into an environment where you want to create change, let them go away, let them have fun together, and then take a little bit more money and let them try out some shit. Let's anything that is safe. Google back then did the 80-20 to say half on Fridays, do whatever you want. And if you do it right, they just continue with their job. That means they do what they love anyways. But give them time and a little bit of money to fund them to do what they would do if they could do whatever they wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love that. So, if our listeners want to learn more about you or about the work that you do at Resourceful Humans, what are the best online places to go to?
Well, our website probably where you'll find videos about what we do. Again, I can also just highly recommend that you read that book, Turn the Ship Around, or you can read a fantastic book which we're going to base our next virtual reality game on, which is The Starfish and the Spider by Ori Braffman. I don't know if you've heard about that. So he talked about companies like eBay being more like starfish and centralized companies like Mercedes-Benz, for example, being more like spiders. If you have a central head and you kill the head, the company's dead. But if a starfish is cut in half, it produces two starfish. And eBay is sort of like that, that if the headquarter in Palo Alto is downed in an earthquake, the country organizations go on, right? It's not dependent on the central organism. So it's a fantastic metaphor to what the network organization is to the hierarchy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for this conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. I really look forward to our conversation in the CultureBrained community, where we will talk about why performance management is not working and what would be a better alternative to it. So we still have something to look forward to in terms of chatting and exploring these fascinating topics around culture. My final question to you, Heiko, is going to be, do you have any recommendations for us of people who would make a great guest on the show?
I'd recommend those two, either Ori Braffman or David Marquet. I think they both offer such a unique, actionable insight to leadership for a question that is on everybody's mind. How do I work less like a hierarchy? How do I get people not just engaged, but invested into work and in an environment, for example, in David's case, the military? You don't think that anybody could ever change the military. And yet there's this guy who created 10 times better results by the way he acted as a leader, right? And I think that Ori Braffman with the Starfish and the Spider, he was just 10 years ahead of the curve with the way he described what those systems are and what they need. So bottom line is I think you should have Ori and David on your show.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a lot of fun, and I hope you come by and play the VR simulation someday when you're in Berlin.
Oh, I would love to. Thank you for the invite. I'm definitely going to be there.
Cool. Looking forward.
I'm Aga Bayer, the creator and host of the Culture Lab podcast, and this is the Culture Lab team.
Production manager, Lindsay Nunez.
Sound producer, Heather McPherson, Twisted Spur Media.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Culture Lab podcast. Heiko and I hope that you get inspired by what he shared about his journey and his approach to cultivating a truly entrepreneurial culture. And if you'd like an opportunity to interact with Heiko and to hear his ideas around what's a better alternative to the traditional performance management system, you might consider joining the CultureBrained community. We will have a fireside chat with Heiko in August, and you can pick his brain about how to revamp the performance management system, a system that is way past its due date. CultureBrained, by the way, is a one-of-a-kind global community for culture leaders who look for new ways of cultivating remarkable cultures in this brave new world of remote and hybrid work. If you're in charge of a culture-shaping project, and if you believe that work should be synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging, you'd probably feel right at home in our community. It's a diverse group of culture leaders from Fortune 100s to tiny startups that are on a rapid growth trajectory. And what brings us together is a passion for cultivating a healthy culture at scale. We are guided by our values of being bold, being kind, and being curious. And we'd love for you to join, but only if it feels like it's the right fit for you. You can learn more at tiny.one/CultureBrained. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in and listening to this episode of the Culture Lab podcast. If you found any moments that were interesting, inspiring, or maybe even game-changing, please share this episode with someone who'd appreciate it. After all, good ideas are meant to be shared. If you haven't subscribed to the Culture Lab yet, you can do it on any podcast streaming platform of your choice. If you want to receive our weekly insights on cultivating a remarkable, powerful, and authentic company culture, especially in a business that scales, type this into your browser: tinyurl.com/Agabayer. That's tinyurl.com/AGABAJER. Also, we would be ever so grateful if you could rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to it. And finally, the entire Culture Lab team and our guests, we are going to continue exploring how we can make the word work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. and how we can build remarkable cultures that scale as our businesses grow and the world keeps on changing. So, what do you want to hear about next? What matters to you? Email us at lindsay@agabayer.com and let us know.